Every day at a worn-down diner on the east side, a single father who worked the line slipped extra food onto the plate of a poor girl who only ordered the cheapest thing on the menu. No one asked him to do it. No one paid him back. Then one afternoon, she pulled his hand close and whispered, "I'll marry you when I'm rich." He smiled, thinking it was just hunger talking. The next morning, she was gone. 3 years passed. A line of black cars pulled up outside the diner. She stepped out. This time, she really was rich. But was the promise still intact? Daniel Brooks had been working the line at Harper's Diner for close to 8 years. The place sat on a corner lot near the interstate, the kind of spot truckers stopped at for coffee and eggs before dawn. The vinyl booths were cracked. The linoleum floor had gone dull from years of foot traffic, and the neon sign out front flickered every time it rained. But the food was decent, the portions were honest, and Daniel knew how to keep his head down and his hands moving. He was in his early 40s now, lean from standing all day, hair starting to gray at the temples. He had a daughter, Sophie, who was 16 and lived with her mother across town. The divorce had been quiet. No lawyers, just two people who realized they had stopped trying. He saw Sophie every other weekend and sent money when he could. The rest of his life was the diner, the small apartment he rented above a hardware store, and the routine that kept him upright. The girl showed up on a Tuesday in late autumn. Daniel noticed her because she sat at the same table every time, the one near the front window that looked out onto the street. She was young, maybe early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a jacket 2 sizes too big. She always ordered the same thing, a bowl of soup and a dinner roll. $3.50. She paid in cash, counted out the coins carefully, and left no tip. At first, Daniel didn't think much of it. The diner saw plenty of people passing through, some with more money than sense, others with none at all. But after the 4th or 5th visit, he started to notice the way she ate. Slowly, like she was trying to make it last. She would tear the roll into small pieces, dip each one into the soup, and chew with her eyes closed. When the bowl was empty, she would sit for a while longer, staring out the window, before folding her napkin and walking out. One evening, Daniel was plating an order when he saw her come in. The dinner rush had passed, and the diner was mostly empty. She took her usual seat, ordered the soup, and waited with her hands folded on the table. Daniel looked at the pot of stew he had just pulled off the stove. It was good stew, thick with beef and potatoes, the kind that stuck to your ribs. He ladled out a bowl, added a piece of cornbread on the side, and brought it out with the soup. She looked up at him, confused. Daniel set the stew down next to the soup bowl and said nothing. She opened her mouth like she was about to ask a question, but he had already turned back toward the kitchen. When he glanced over his shoulder a minute later, she was eating the stew. Her shoulders had relaxed, and for the first time since she started coming in, she looked like she wasn't holding her breath. After that, it became a habit. Daniel would slip her something extra whenever he could. A side of mashed potatoes, a chicken breast, a slice of pie that was about to go stale anyway. He never made a show of it, never asked if she wanted it. He just put it down and walked away. Sometimes she would look at him like she wanted to say thank you, but Daniel would shake his head slightly, and she would go back to eating. The other staff noticed, but no one said anything. Harper's wasn't the kind of place where people asked too many questions. The owner, a man named Gene, who only showed up twice a week to check the register, didn't care as long as the numbers balanced out at the end of the month. Daniel made sure they did. If he had to cover the cost of a plate here and there, he did it out of his own pocket. Weeks passed. The girl kept coming, and Daniel kept feeding her. They didn't talk much. Once she asked him his name, and he told her. She said hers was Emily. That was all. No last name, no story, no explanation for why she was eating soup for dinner 5 nights a week. Daniel didn't press. He had learned a long time ago that people who needed help didn't always want to explain why. Then one night in early December, something shifted. The diner was quiet, just a couple of regulars at the counter and Emily at her table by the window. Daniel had made a pot roast that afternoon, and he brought her a full plate: roast, carrots, gravy, and a biscuit. He set it down in front of her, and this time she didn't just nod. She looked up at him, and her eyes were wet. Emily said his name softly. Daniel stopped, his hand still on the edge of the table. She didn't say anything else for a moment, just looked at him like she was trying to figure out how to put words to something that didn't have words. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, her grip light but deliberate. She told him she would marry him when she was rich. Her voice was steady, like she had been thinking about it for a while and had finally decided to say it out loud. Daniel blinked, caught off guard, then smiled. It was the kind of smile you give someone when they say something sweet and impossible, like a kid promising to buy you a house when they grow up. He told her he would hold her to that, his tone gentle, teasing. She didn't smile back. She just squeezed his hand once and let go. Daniel went back to the kitchen, still thinking about the way she had said it. Not like a joke, not like a fantasy, like a promise. He shook his head, scraped the grill clean, and told himself it didn't mean anything. People said things when they were grateful. It didn't have to mean more than that. The next day, Emily didn't come in. Daniel noticed her absence the way you notice when a clock stops ticking. He kept glancing at the table by the window, expecting to see her there, but it stayed empty. He told himself she was just busy, or maybe she had found a better place to eat. But when she didn't show up the day after that, or the day after that, something in his chest tightened. A week went by. Then 2. Daniel kept her table open during the evening shift, even when the diner got busy and people asked to sit there. He would tell them it was reserved, which wasn't true, but no one argued. He started walking past the window more often than he needed to, looking out at the street like he might see her walking up. He didn't. By the 3rd week, he stopped keeping the table reserved. He told himself it was stupid to hold on to something that wasn't coming back. Emily was gone. That was all there was to it. People moved on. People disappeared. It happened all the time, and it didn't mean anything except that life kept going whether you were ready for it or not. But at night, when he lay in bed in his small apartment and couldn't sleep, he thought about the way she had looked at him when she said it, the way her hand had felt in his, cold and certain. He thought about the fact that she had kept coming back, night after night, even when she didn't have to. And he thought about how, for a little while, feeding her had felt like the most important thing he did all day. Daniel didn't talk about it with anyone. There was no one to talk to. Sophie was wrapped up in her own life, and his ex-wife had stopped asking how he was doing years ago. The people at the diner were co-workers, not friends. So he kept it to himself, buried it under the rhythm of work and rent and the occasional weekend visit with his daughter. Winter came. The diner stayed busy. Daniel kept cooking, kept showing up, kept doing what he had always done. And Emily's table by the window stayed empty. Just another seat in a worn-down diner on the east side, waiting for someone who never came back. The first year after Emily disappeared, Daniel convinced himself he had imagined the whole thing. Not her presence, but the weight of it. The way it had felt like something was building between them, even though neither of them had ever said more than a few words at a time. He told himself it was just kindness, the kind any decent person would show to someone who was struggling, nothing more than that. But every time someone sat at the table by the window, he found himself looking over, half expecting to see her there. It never was. Just strangers passing through, people who ordered coffee and pancakes and left without a second thought. The diner kept running the way it always had, steady and unremarkable, and Daniel kept working the line, flipping eggs and grilling burgers and wiping down the counter at the end of every shift. Jean sold the diner in the spring, The new owner was a woman named Linda, who had run a breakfast place in Ohio before moving south. She was sharp, efficient, and she liked Daniel. She promoted him to head cook within 2 months, gave him a raise, and started talking about expanding the menu. Daniel didn't care much about the title, but he appreciated the extra money. It meant he could send more to Sophie, who was applying to colleges now and needed help with application fees. Linda also started a program where the diner donated leftover food to a shelter downtown. She asked Daniel to handle it, since he was already in the kitchen most nights anyway. He agreed without hesitation. Twice a week, he would box up whatever hadn't sold, load it into the back of his truck, and drive it over to a building on 7th Street where people lined up for meals. It reminded him of Emily, though he tried not to think about that too much. One night at the shelter, a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes, thanked him for the food. She said it was the first real meal she'd had in 3 days. Daniel told her it was no trouble, but she shook her head and said it mattered. She said kindness like that stayed with people, even when everything else fell apart. He thought about Emily's hand in his, cold and certain, and he wondered if she had ever thought about him after she left. The second year passed faster than the first. Sophie graduated high school and got into a state school 2 hours away. Daniel helped her move into her dorm, carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs, and tried not to let her see how much it hurt to leave her there. She hugged him before he left, told him she loved him, and said she would call every week. She did for a while. Then the calls became every other week. Then once a month. Daniel didn't blame her. That was what growing up looked like. Work became the center of his life in a way it hadn't been before. He started coming in earlier, staying later, testing new recipes when the diner was slow. Linda gave him more responsibility, let him make decisions about inventory and staffing. He hired a kid named Marcus, 19 years old, and fresh out of a bad situation at home, and taught him how to work the grill. Marcus reminded him a little of Emily, the way he showed up every day and didn't ask for anything except a chance to prove himself. Daniel still thought about her, not every day, but often enough. He would see someone with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail or hear someone order soup, and for a split second, his heart would skip. Then he would realize it wasn't her, and the moment would pass. He told himself it was normal to remember people who had touched your life, even briefly. It didn't mean he was stuck, it just meant he was human. But there were nights when he lay in bed and wondered if she had been serious, if she really had meant it when she said she would marry him when she was rich. He wondered where she was, what she was doing, if she had found her way out of whatever hole she had been in. He hoped she had. He hoped she was okay. And then he would roll over and go to sleep, because hope was about all he had, to offer someone who wasn't there. By the 3rd year, the diner had changed. Linda renovated the booths, replaced the old neon sign with something cleaner and brighter, and added a small patio out back where people could eat in the warmer months. The place started attracting a different crowd, younger people, families, couples on date nights. It was still affordable, still the kind of place where you could get a good meal without spending $20, but it felt less like a truck stop and more like a neighborhood spot. Daniel was proud of that. He had been part of making it happen, even if no one outside the kitchen knew his name. He had built something stable, something that mattered. Sophie was doing well in school, calling less but sending pictures when she remembered. His ex-wife had remarried, which was fine. He didn't feel anything about it one way or the other. His life was small, but it was his, and that was enough. One afternoon in late summer, Daniel was prepping vegetables in the back when Linda came in and told him they had a reservation for a private event that evening. A party of 12, she said, some kind of business dinner. They wanted the whole back section of the diner closed off, and they were paying extra for it. Daniel asked if she needed him to stay late, and she nodded. He told her it wasn't a problem. The group arrived just after 7, Daniel didn't pay much attention at first. He was busy with orders, keeping the line moving, making sure everything went out hot and on time. But when he glanced through the window into the dining room, he saw the back section filled with well-dressed people, men in suits and women in blouses and heels. It wasn't the usual crowd, but Linda had been pulling in more corporate clients lately, so it wasn't surprising. He went back to work. Marcus was handling the grill, and Daniel was plating desserts when Linda came back into the kitchen and told him someone wanted to speak to him. Daniel wiped his hands on his apron and asked who. She said she didn't know, just that one of the guests had asked for the head cook. He frowned, confused, but followed her out into the dining room. The back section was still full, but most of the guests were finishing their meals, talking in low voices over coffee and wine. Linda gestured toward a woman sitting alone at a smaller table near the window. Daniel's chest tightened before his brain could catch up. Dark hair, longer now, styled in a way that looked expensive. A black dress that fit like it had been tailored. She was looking out the window, her hands folded on the table, exactly the way she used to sit. Daniel stopped walking. Linda glanced at him, then back at the woman, then said she would give them a minute. She left, and Daniel stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The woman turned her head, and when her eyes met his, she smiled. Not a big smile, just a small, quiet one, like she had been waiting for him to notice. Emily stood up slowly, like she wasn't sure if he would recognize her. Daniel felt his throat close. She looked different. Older, yes, but also polished in a way that didn't match the girl who used to count out coins for a bowl of soup. She took a step toward him, and he realized he still hadn't moved. She said his name. Her voice was the same, soft and steady. Daniel tried to say something back, but nothing came out. She stopped a few feet away, her hands clasped in front of her, and asked if he remembered her. He nodded, because of course he did. How could he not? Emily told him she was sorry for leaving the way she did. She said she had wanted to explain, but she couldn't at the time. Daniel finally found his voice and asked where she had been. She looked at him for a long moment, then said she had gone home. He didn't understand, and she must have seen that on his face, because she gestured toward the table and asked if he could sit for a minute. Daniel glanced back toward the kitchen. Marcus was handling things, and Linda would cover if anything went wrong. He walked over to the table and sat down across from Emily. She folded her hands again, the same way she used to, and he noticed her nails were painted now. A pale pink that looked professional. Everything about her looked professional. It was disorienting. She told him she hadn't been honest with him 3 years ago. Not about who she was or why she was eating soup 5 nights a week. Daniel didn't say anything, just waited. Emily said she had grown up with money, more than most people would know what to do with. Her father owned a company, something in real estate and investment, and she had spent her entire childhood being groomed to take over someday. But she hadn't wanted that life. She had wanted to know what it felt like to be on her own, to build something that wasn't handed to her. So she left, walked away from the money, the house, the name, all of it. She changed her appearance, stopped using credit cards, and lived off what little she had saved. She said it was the hardest thing she had ever done, and also the most important. Because it taught her who she was when no one was watching, when no one expected anything from her. Daniel listened, his hands resting on the table. He didn't know what to say. Emily kept talking. She said that during that time, the only person who had treated her like she mattered was him. Not because of what she could offer, not because of who her family was, but because he had seen someone struggling and decided to help. She said that had stayed with her, even after she went back. Daniel asked why she went back. Emily said her father had gotten sick, stage 4 lung cancer. He didn't have long, and her mother couldn't handle the business on her own. So Emily returned, took over the company, and spent the last year of her father's life learning everything he had built. He died 6 months ago. Now the company was hers. She looked at Daniel, and her expression softened. She said she had thought about him the whole time, about the way he used to bring her food without asking for anything in return, about the promise she had made, half serious, half desperate, because she didn't know how else to say thank you. She asked if he remembered. Daniel said he did. His voice came out quieter than he meant it to. Emily smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. She said she had meant it. Every word. Daniel didn't know what to say. He sat across from Emily, watching her hands folded on the table, the same way they used to be when she was waiting for her soup. Except now, her nails were polished, her dress looked like it cost more than his rent, and she was telling him she had meant a promise she made 3 years ago when she had nothing. He asked her why she was here, not in the diner, but here at his table, telling him all of this now. Emily looked at him like she had been expecting the question. She said she came back because she wanted to see him, because she had spent 3 years trying to be the person her father needed her to be, and now that he was gone, she wanted to figure out who she was supposed to be for herself. Daniel told her he didn't understand. Emily leaned forward slightly, her voice steady but softer now. She said that when she left the diner 3 years ago, she thought she was walking away from everything that mattered. But the truth was, the only thing that had mattered during that time was sitting right in front of her. She said he had fed her when she was hungry, not because he wanted something from her, but because it was the right thing to do. And that had stayed with her longer than anything else. He looked down at his hands, rough from years of working the grill, and tried to process what she was saying. Emily asked if he was angry that she left without explaining. Daniel shook his head. He told her he wasn't angry. He said he had just assumed she moved on, found something better, and he had been okay with that. Emily's expression shifted, something almost sad crossing her face. She said she hadn't found anything better. She had just found different. She asked if he remembered what she said the last time she saw him. Daniel said he did. Every word. Emily smiled, and this time it looked almost nervous. She said she had come back to ask if he would let her take him to dinner. Not here, not at the diner, but somewhere else. Somewhere they could talk without the noise of the kitchen or the weight of the past 3 years sitting between them. Daniel didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure what to say. Part of him wanted to tell her yes, that he had thought about her more times than he could count, that seeing her walk back into his life felt like something he hadn't known he was waiting for. But another part of him, the part that had learned to keep his expectations low, wondered if this was just guilt. If she was here because she felt like she owed him something, and once that debt was paid, she would disappear again. Emily must have seen the hesitation on his face, because she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm now, not cold like it had been 3 years ago. She said she wasn't asking because she felt obligated. She was asking because she wanted to know him, the real him, not just the man who had been kind to her when she had nothing. She said she wanted to see if the connection she felt back then was real, or if it was just desperation and gratitude wrapped up in something that looked like more. Daniel looked at her hand on his, then back at her face. He asked what would happen if it wasn't real. Emily didn't flinch. She said then they would know, and they could both move on. But she said she didn't think that was what would happen. She said she had spent 3 years around people who only cared about what she could do for them, and the only person she kept thinking about was someone who had never asked her for anything. He told her he wasn't the same person she remembered, that 3 years had passed for him too, and his life wasn't exciting or impressive. He worked in a diner, lived in a small apartment, and spent most of his free time trying to figure out how to be a decent father to a daughter who didn't need him as much anymore. Emily said that was exactly who she remembered, someone who showed up, did the work, and didn't make a big deal out of it. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. He told her he would go to dinner with her, but only if she let him pay. Emily laughed, a real laugh, and said that wasn't going to happen. He said then they could split it. She shook her head and told him she had enough money to buy the entire restaurant if she wanted to, so he should let her do this one thing. Daniel smiled despite himself and said fine, but next time he was paying. Emily's expression softened at the words, next time. She asked if that meant he was open to there being a next time. Daniel said he was. He said he didn't know where this was going or what it would look like, but he was willing to find out. Emily nodded, her hand still resting on his, and said that was all she was asking for. They sat there for a moment, neither of them saying anything, just holding on to the quiet between them. Then Emily glanced toward the back section where her business dinner was wrapping up. She said she needed to go, but she would call him tomorrow to set something up. Daniel asked how she would call him when she didn't have his number. Emily pulled out her phone and handed it to him. He typed in his number, saved it, and handed it back. Before she left, Emily stood and looked down at him. She said she was glad he was still here, still doing what he did. Daniel asked what she meant. She said the world needed more people like him, people who helped without expecting anything in return. He told her he wasn't special, that anyone would have done the same. Emily shook her head and said that wasn't true. Most people wouldn't. Most people didn't. She walked back toward her group, and Daniel sat at the table for another minute, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He felt like he had been holding his breath for 3 years and had only just now exhaled. When he finally stood and walked back into the kitchen, Marcus asked if everything was okay. Daniel said it was. Better than okay. The next evening, Emily called. They met at a restaurant across town, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list Daniel didn't understand. Emily ordered for both of them, and they talked for 3 hours. She asked about Sophie, about the diner, about what his life had been like since she left. Daniel asked about her father, about taking over the company, about whether she had any regrets. She said she had plenty, but coming back to see him wasn't one of them. Over the next few weeks, they kept seeing each other. Coffee in the mornings before Daniel's shift, lunch on his days off, dinner when Emily could get away from the office. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't dramatic. It was careful, deliberate. 2 people trying to figure out if what they had was real or just the memory of something that had mattered once. Daniel learned that Emily was sharp, funny, and more stubborn than he had realized. She worked long hours, took her responsibilities seriously, and still ordered soup whenever they went somewhere casual. She learned that Daniel was steady, patient, and better at listening than most people she had ever met. He didn't try to fix her problems or tell her what to do. He just let her talk, and that was something she hadn't realized she needed. One night, they went back to the diner. It was late after closing, and Linda had given Daniel the keys so he could lock up. Emily sat at the table by the window, the same one she used to sit at, and Daniel brought her a bowl of soup and a dinner roll. She looked at the plate, then at him, and smiled. She said some things didn't need to change. Daniel sat down across from her, and they ate together in the quiet diner. Emily said she had been thinking about what came next. She said her life was complicated, and she couldn't promise it would get easier. But she said she wanted him in it if he was willing. Daniel told her he was. He said he didn't need easy. He just needed honest. Emily reached across the table and took his hand. She said she had kept her promise. She had gotten rich, and now she was asking if he would let her keep the second part. Daniel asked what the second part was. She said the part where she stayed, the part where they figured out what this was together, the part where she didn't leave again. Daniel squeezed her hand and said yes. He said he would like that. Emily smiled, and for the first time since she walked back into his life, she looked like the girl who used to sit at this table and count out coins for soup. Except now, she wasn't alone. And neither was he. Kindness. The real kind doesn't ask for anything back. But sometimes, when you least expect it, it finds its way home.